The first question we will attempt to answer is, how did Jesus speak? What language did he use while preaching the multitudes? How did the disciples receive his parables? And what effects did his words have on his listeners? Jesus taught in the Roman provinces of Galilee and Judea, and his words had substantial influence on his followers. Thus, Jesus spoke in the language or in the dialect understood by the people of those regions. But now the question is, what language did the people of Galilee and Judea speak? The simple answer to that is, we do not know for sure, as John Meyer pointed out. We do not have an audio recording from 1st century Palestine. All we have are compositions and inscriptions which date back to that era in Palestine. The ambiguity associated with this type of evidence, however, caused a sharp division amongst researchers about the language Jesus spoke. Some asserted that he spoke Greek. Others believed it to be Aramaic, and others argued he spoke Hebrew. One of the most meticulous researchers in regards to this matter was John Emerton, who attempted to find common grounds between the different opinions, and he said that Aramaic was the common language among the people of Galilee. Jesus spoke Aramaic there, or in other words, amongst the people of Galilee. However, Jesus spoke both Hebrew and Aramaic in Judea at different times, which were both the common languages of those regions. The ambiguity regarding what language Jesus spoke can be due to many factors, such as the scarcity of two primary sources, namely, the literary works and the archaeological inscriptions of that time. The most notable of these inscriptions are the funerary inscriptions found on the tombs of the dead, which show us the language of the dead or the language of their families. However, some factors impacted these funerary inscriptions. For example, some families were inclined to write on the tombstones in the language that dominated at their time. The scholar Jan Nicolaas Sevenster points out that many containers which contained Jewish bones or their relics had inscriptions in Greek, which was the language of the family. It was very common for the Jews to put the bones of the dead who were poor in a coffin made of wood, or in stone if they were rich. Some scholars mention that the Aramaic language declined in light of the Hellenistic dominance of the Seleucids in Syria during the 2nd and 3rd centuries BC. The Seleucid Empire was a Hellenistic or Greek state that ruled central Anatolia, Persia, Syria, the Eastern Mediterranean, Mesopotamia, and what is now Kuwait, Afghanistan, and parts of Pakistan and Turkmenistan. It is important to note that the evidence gathered from the inscriptions dating back to the 2nd century BC up to the 2nd century AD does not necessarily tell us what language the Jewish people spoke at the beginning of the 1st century AD. The real decline in Jewish identity began under the authority of the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans. The Maccabees are a Jewish military group that revolted against the rulers of Syria, the Seleucids, and were capable of establishing the Hasmonean dynasty, which ruled Judea and the surrounding regions between around 164 to 63 BC. They were famous for their strong zeal for the Jewish religion, and they opposed the spread of the Hellenistic culture and the Greek language in the Jewish community. The Hasmoneans were the ruling dynasty of the Kingdom of Judea in the 2nd and 1st century BC, and they were mentioned in the first book of the Maccabees, specifically in chapters 2 and 14. The second Hasmonean king in Judea, Alexander Jannaeus, and who acted as high priest as well, issued the first coin during his reign, which contained both Hebrew and Greek. Alexander ruled from 103 to 76 BC, and he was the son of John Hyrcanus. He inherited the kingdom from his brother Aristobulus I and married his brother's widow, Queen Salome Alexander. He was recognized as a bloodthirsty and cruel tyrant because he was behind the civil war that erupted for the sake of expanding the kingdom. At the end of the 1st century BC, King Herod the Great continued to Hellenize the Jewish community, or in other words, make the Jewish community more Greek-like in culture. However, there was an attempt to revive the language of the ancestors during the time of the Maccabees, during which the spread of the Hebrew and Aramaic languages was emphasized in Palestine, as evidenced by the texts of Qumran, which were discussed briefly in our study of the Didache.